It's her, but
Okay.
I'm not.
We're not going to hear your question.
My identity should not be.
You're gonna do the Werner Herzog voiceover, like
I heard a great interview with Herzog
he's
on
fucking
NPR
brilliant.
yesterday.
He's brilliant.
Or was it yesterday or the day before? Yesterday, I think.
He's so sad and dour though. You know, it's like these penguins may never see another day on the earth, but today they will eat well.
The closing question was, what do you do to unwind? Because you're always working so hard. He's 77, and he said, "I'm always unwound."
Interesting. Yeah, he is kind of, but he's a little monotone. He's like he probably doesn't laugh. You know, he's probably like, that is a funny joke. I heard it before. You know?
Okay, I am rolling.
Okay,
So,
so you had a chance to look at what
I
sent
skim
you.
read it.
Okay.
Yep.
So I want to talk with you about the things you do as a baker, and I thought it would be best if what we did was just start with some biographical, how you got to where you are right now professionally.
Okay. As a baker, not necessarily as it relates to heirloom wheat or
No,
just okay.
You're, how you moved into
Sure.
the profession.
Short story or long story?
Short story.
Okay. So I grew up back east in Massachusetts, in a small fishing town, Rockport, Massachusetts, and always worked in the food industry, washing dishes, peeling potatoes, cutting carrots, you know, just kind of free child labor in all the local restaurants, and knew my way around the kitchen, and had an opportunity to work in the next town over in Gloucester, Mass, at a natural foods cafe, and amazing shop called the Glass Sailboat, kind of an iconic spot on the North Shore of Massachusetts, where you could buy your Nag Champa, you could get Birkenstocks, you could buy meditation tapes by Alan Watts, you could buy grain salads and cappuccinos and a lot of kind of macrobiotic foods and healthful baked goods. And one day, a new manager started who was working in Amherst as a bread baker, and was a bread baker through and through. His name was Michael Levy, and he started baking bread. And I said, wow, that's, you know, I would love to learn how to make bread. And he said, well, you feel free to come in before your shift on your dime, and you can watch me make bread. So I started doing it before my sandwich soup dishwasher prep shift, and immediately fell in love with what it was to work with dough and yeast in a more living thing than carrots and potatoes. Worked with him for about a year, high schools, during my weekends and summers in high school, and ended up through a series of pretty funny events landing in Boulder, Colorado, where a brand new bakery had just opened on Pearl Street called Daily Bread. And Daily Bread was born of some folks from Kansas, Tom Leonard and David Berenson, and quite a few affiliations with Kansas farmers and millers. Heartland Mill was the flour that we used at that time, and a Mennonite cooperative mill. And had the opportunity to learn more about bread baking, and continued to fall deeper and deeper in love with it. On a path to college in California that actually never came about, never left, never actually made it to Santa Barbara to go to school, just stayed in Boulder, continuing to make bread. I was paying the bills and really loving what I was learning, even though it seemed like it was a stop on the way, and I was headed to be a marine biologist and be on the water and be Steve Zissou, and or perhaps Jacques Cousteau, but got stuck in Boulder, and that was 24 years ago. Whole Foods Market came to town in '97, and ended up buying the bakery, Daily Bread, and the bakery got uprooted and placed into the new store, Whole Foods Market store in Boulder. and we became very busy at Whole Foods. Since the day they opened the doors on the Pearl Street Whole Foods Market, it was through the roof busy, and we were baking around the clock, and did that for a few years until Whole Foods continued to open more stores in this region, and I opened up a large bakehouse to provide bread to all of these new stores in Cherry Creek and Highlands Ranch and Kansas City and Santa Fe and Albuquerque, and ended up staying with Whole Foods Market for 15 years, running the bread and pastry program out of a regional bakery. Left Whole Foods and moved on to work with some friends at Udi's Izio for a short time. And during that time, that internal drive to be my own boss and to open a small bakery like the one I had come from never really left, and was always something I'd think about at night when I'd shut my eyes, is being in a very intimate, small environment, working closely with customers and my staff and our farmers and our vendors, and just being smaller again and being able to make change. If I want to make a new bread, I make a new bread in one day. If I want to try 100% einkorn bread, I wake up a little bit earlier, I come in, I mix it, I bake it, and I sell it. And I go onto my little chalkboard out front and I write einkorn bread today. I'm not pushing it through a marketing department for 6 months to launch it. I'm not creating a UPC for it. I'm just making bread. So about 3 years ago, this beautiful location of Moxie Bread Co. here in Louisville became available, and I scraped together some resources and just went for it, and pulled on some of my favorite human beings in the world to help me open it. Some of the most talented bakers and customer service folks that I knew, and most of whom are still here today 3 years later, and opened a small community bakery that is focused on using nothing but heirloom grain.
So
That was the short
that's
story.
good. That's good. I want to stop just for a moment and ask Paul about the sound quality.
Mona, do I look okay?
It's okay. It's okay.
Maybe
Yeah,
just
it's okay.
add a little bit.
That mic
what's
is
expected.
that mic is picking up.
Yeah, well, it's
Close
picking
enough.
his
Okay.
voice up much nicer.
Okay.
So
Good.
it's fine.
All right. So I wanted to ask you some questions about the grain.
Sure.
And so I'm just interested in both your knowledge and your opinions about grain, and whether you've was there a time when wheat was just wheat for you, and was there a time, and was there a time when the light went on, or the
Yeah.
switch flipped?
So, I think I think a lot of us who have good teachers just follow what you're taught, and you do what you do because that's the only way you knew how, and you learn that way. So I feel very fortunate to have had some really strong mentors and teachers who said, this is the kind of wheat you use, this is how you ferment it, and this is how you work with human beings, and just some of the tenets of what I still follow here in Moxie. So from day one, in using Heartland Mill in Marienthal, Kansas, a small family-run Mennonite cooperative that does predominantly organic grain milled in western Kansas, and continues to do Turkey Red, their Mennonite heritage grain. Worked with that mill for a long time. I guess I never really knew what was in the bag, for 10 or 15 years. I knew it was good. I knew it made really good bread. It tasted good. I didn't know a lot about how it was grown. I didn't know a lot about the variety. Didn't know about... I just trusted that they were giving us great stuff. And it was good stuff. And then a handful of years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago, Tom Leonard, who helped to plant more acreage of turkey red in the 1970s and 80s in western Kansas, came to me telling me he had started this new heritage grain company working with Heartland Mill, and it was dedicated to organic turkey red, and he had 3 farmers planting it. Bryce Stevens was one of them, and I was working at Whole Foods Market, and he said this would be, this is something amazing, very specific variety, very healthful grain, and so I worked with Tom, and we made an heirloom wheat bread at Whole Foods, and we launched it, and we put some marketing behind it, and it didn't really do much. It wasn't much of a splash. I think a very brief moment of excitement from our customers, but I put my heart into it. The guys at Heartland Mill who are grinding the wheat, for Tom's wheat, we gave it this great push, and it kind of splashed in the pan, flash in the pan. That 7 or 8 years ago, in learning about where the grain came from, and that it had over 1 million acres planted in North America at that time, that had dwindled to 400 or 500 in 40 or so years, started to make some wheels turn in my head. So by the time I made it to opening Moxie Bread Co. 3 years ago, I knew that I wanted fresh ground, fresh milled, in-house heirloom grain to be a part of our breads and our pastries.
Milled in-house.
Milled in-house, yeah. And so I got a mill. I actually borrowed a mill, and connected with Bryce and Demetrius Stevens in Hastings? No, in Jennings, Kansas, and started to grind that and use delicious biodynamic heirloom turkey red in about less than half of our breads. So that's been our entire history of Moxie Bread Co. has been using a portion of this heirloom wheat. About a year ago, I had a sort of chance meeting with Mark Nightingale of Heartland Mill and Bob Quinn of Kamut, and I was in the midst of growing a gluten-free bread. We opened Moxie 3 years ago. So proud to sell long fermented, heirloom wheat heavy, organic flour bread that really should be good for you, and really proud of that. Really incredibly proud. And people just kept coming up the front door and saying, well, that sounds great, but I can't eat it. I'm gluten free. I'd say, well, are you celiac? Like, well, no, I'm not celiac, but I have problems with wheat and with gluten. And I've been a part of very close to the gluten-free industry since its inception, since the large growth of it, 10 or 15 years ago, having a lot of question marks and reservations about the true science and the truth behind gluten-free, and thinking that it was just a bunch of bullshit, and thinking it was a very Boulder County specific problem and perhaps not a true problem. And so our customers continue to come in the front door asking for gluten-free. I continue to give them a very long, boring, dry diatribe about heirloom wheat and our long fermentation process, organic grains, simple ingredient decks, and how they really probably can eat our bread. And they say, that's great, but I need gluten-free. So we developed a gluten-free bread that was delicious and nutrient dense and healthful. And so I was at a trade show actually promoting this gluten-free bread that we had formulated, and had this chance meeting with Mark Nightingale and Bob Quinn, and I just I was Bob Quinn from Kamut and Mark Nightingale from Heartland Mill, wheat farmers and wheat producers and millers, and had this sort of off-the-cuff conversation about sort of sheepishly, like, well, I'm here because I'm selling a gluten-free bread, and I was ashamed to say it. And even though I love the gluten-free bread, I was, sitting with some wheat guys, and I said, yeah, it's just, I can't fathom how wheat has been the staple of civilization since day one, and has fed armies and conquered new lands and fed us, and suddenly in the past 10 or 20 years is making everybody sick. Like, how does that work? I've been forced to make gluten-free bread at my gluten bakery, and I'll do it. I like feeding people. I don't care what I'm feeding them, as long as there's some, I want to feed people, and and in that conversation with Bob Quinn and Mark Nightingale, Bob says, well, no, there's reasons behind it. These modern wheat varieties are very problematic, and I have clinical studies to prove that the variety of Corazon so Bob says I have clinical trials that medically prove that these older varieties of wheat and this Corazon that I plant a lot of is actually not only doesn't cause gut disruption and reactivity in human beings, it's actually anti-inflammatory. And here's the science to prove it. And so I'm flipping through his bibliography of all of the reports in the past year that he has that support his specific grains claims, and that sparked a variety of other conversations, just questioning, where not only where the wheat comes from, but where the seed came from, and who developed it, and what was the intention in the wheat breeding that developed that. Was it health attributes, nutrient density, digestibility, flavor, and in many instances that's not the, wheat breeding is done for, or had been done for a long time, for pest resistance and the ability to withstand hail and lodging in the wind and, different fungal disorders and yield and predictability and tonnage and all this stuff. Oh, it's their like, I don't even know what it is.
Are you needed?
I don't know. So these light bulbs started to go off, Chloe, do you need me? Well, here, come do it. We'll take a quick break.
I don't want to go off of this topic, but I don't want to stay on it too much longer.
Okay.
Because I want to get back to wheat grains.
Okay.
And like how you found the grains and why you're
Do it.
experimenting.
Go.
I'm totally gonna hang out for like
Chloe just wants to be on camera. She was hoping she'd come back here and get
15
in.
minutes.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be much longer than that anyway.
Good luck.
I just had a coffee. I just got all jacked up.
It's not for lack of mileage. Paul thinks it'd be a bad idea to collect
go
that much
tap.
footage. Yeah,
I know.
so
I
I think
know.
you're right. Yeah. So
Yeah, guide me.
yeah. Well, if I do this,
Wrap
just
it.
Wrap that
Okay.
topic.
Okay.
And
Well, I'll tie that up.
Ty, go ahead. Can you? Oh, we need.
Let me wait until she's done with that.
Spend a lot of time here up there. I got Keely writing out that thing for me.
Actually,
Sending the receipt.
Okay.
Great. So that's all.
tell him I got a.
Feel less worried with these.
Aren't they nice?
Super. I mean, I'm such a fidgeter. I used to work for a guy who was like, we'd have meetings and he would bounce balls and he'd hit them off, and a lot of people were like, dude, like, but I just knew he was always like,
Yeah, I'm constantly holding worry beads.
Yeah,
I always carry worry beads. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Unbelievable.
You're here to do your job. We're keeping you from it.
I'll leave it for tomorrow.
That's all I needed.
Okay, let me think for 1 second here.
So,
In summary, yeah, at a certain point, I became very obsessed with where the wheat seed came from, who grew it, and what happens in the time that it got to me. And when that started to happen, I just started working directly with farmers to get the wheat seeds that I want to use and feed people.
so that saves me a lot of questions that I would otherwise have asked.
Good. I told you the ramble will catch a lot.
But I wanted to ask you some things about supply chain
Mm-hmm.
and also about your bread.
Okay.
These are two things I want to ask you about. One, so about the supply chain. I know that you try, when possible, to buy locally, or you're trying to stimulate local grain production. Are you alone doing this, or do you have other people you're trying to bring along?
You know, in the past 3 years, there's been a convergence of a lot of folks with common interests that are actually making things happen and actually getting seeds planted in the ground. So for maybe 10
Locally.
locally here in Boulder County and in Colorado, and in the neighboring states, you know, within say a 300-mile radius, which to me is great. You know, we sit here on what I call the buckle on the grain belt, and there's grain everywhere. I live 10 miles north. I drive through fields of grain everywhere, and I have no idea where that grain's going. I don't know what kind it is. All I know is I can't buy it. I can't. It's not showing up at Alfalfa's or Whole Foods or the farmers market, which has been shocking to me for a long time, and I laugh about it. You know, or I laughed and I cried about it. So in the past few years, various, you know, common interest groups, Noble Grain Alliance being one of them, has helped to get some seeds into, you know, farmers' hands and get seeds planted. So Aspen Moon has been planting Turkey Red, the variety that we're fond of here, as well as Red Fife and some other varieties, Sonora White this year. Last crop year, we had the amazing fortune of running about, most of our summer using local biodynamic heirloom wheat from Aspen Moon Farms, which was, you know, I couldn't have imagined in a million years that through all of my energy and creativity and sort of hopefulness that we would have access to local grain and I could sell a customer a loaf with local grain. I never really saw it happening. So to be living here in this reality, he's planted 7 acres of heirloom grain that we'll use next year. Super excited about mid to late summer, you know, harvest coming in, and we'll be celebrating wildly.
So, do you see any particular benefits to you as a baker or to your customers if you buy grain that's locally produced?
Well, again, you know, here we are, sort of the buckle on the grain belt in a sense. Wheat grows great in Colorado. Very high quality wheat in many parts of eastern and southwestern Colorado, all over the state. To buy wheat in a bag of commercial wheat that was potentially grown in the high plains states and ground in a different state and packed and shipped in a different state only to make it back to a distributor here in Colorado is pretty goofy. So the food miles aspect of literally, you know, this wheat is being grown on my son's school in Niwot. I've met our farmer multiple times over the summer to pick up my son from cello practice, and I bring the farmer some bread and I throw a bunch of buckets of grain in the back of my truck. So the fulfillment on that on about 5 levels is outstanding.
What about people who buy bread here? Do they ask you questions about that?
People are so excited to buy bread they're so excited to have a small local community bakery that is that exists for them. You know, we're here. We are as much of the community as anything. You know, and that's what my staff. Their kind of fulfillment is being a part of the community, and we're friends, and we go to their parties and their weddings, and they come to ours, and so they're excited that we're here supporting them through healthy and sometimes less healthy, buttery, sugary, soul satisfying baked goods, but they have been so excited to know what farm it came from, who the farmer was. Geez, is that the same farmer that I buy my heirloom tomatoes from at the market? Yes, he that farmer now grows heirloom tomato, squash, the best arugula in the county, and 5 varieties of heirloom grain.
Okay, so I have 3 questions left.
Okay.
That I want to hit on. One about bread, and you can take it however, whatever direction you'd like to take it. But I was wondering if you could, in however you want to characterize it, say what's unique or special about the bread you make in terms of methods, quality, nutrition, flavor. And you can speak both from your perspective as a baker, but also from the perspective of the people who buy your bread.
Sure. It's a deep question for me. I try really hard to bake a bread that's unique to me. There are lots of delicious breads. The past 10 years in America has brought about more phenomenal bakeries in little towns and big cities that make phenomenal bread. Tartine, chief amongst them. I could eat tartine bread every day for the rest of my life and be happy. But I don't want to make tartine bread. I want to make Andy's bread. And so I kind of have horse blinders and try not to look at his method and his way, because I want my own identity and I want to figure out my process that's unique to me. So the method that we use is a long overnight fermentation, almost a 24-hour fermentation of the dough. We mix it and we put it into a bucket and we let it sit in our cooler overnight. And then we form it into loaves and we proof it for a few hours and bake it. In working at Whole Foods Market for a third of my life and selling a lot of healthy stuff, and trying to understand what customers really want, I got a really good education in a certain duality of a customer saying, I really want whole grain, 100% whole grain, no added sweetener, organic, whatever. And then they buy ciabatta or white baguette, 9 times out of 10. And so we would launch, breads that were really delicious grain breads featuring high percentage whole grain, up to 100, mostly 100%. And customers would buy white baguettes and white ciabatta and challah. And these customers would say, I'm so healthy, I love, And so I sort of started to understand that everyone wanted to be healthy, but they really liked putting their triple cream brie on delicious, soft, white, fluffy, pillowy ciabatta. So, however, knowing the nutritional content of white ciabatta relative to a whole grain bread, I was always drawn to try to put more whole grain into loaves. And my current philosophy is I will get more whole grain and healthier seeds and nuts and berries and things into our public and our community by making a bread that has, say, 30 or 40 or 45% whole grain, and grinding the grain a little bit fine if I can, using varieties of grain that have not so dark of a color. There's the Sonora white variety, which is amazing. It's a full whole grain wheat berry. It just has a white outer bran. So when you grind it, it kind of looks, when you grind it up, it sort of looks like white flour. but it's not. It's has a full vitamin and mineral load. So our bread is currently 40% whole grain, but you wouldn't really know it. So when you look at a loaf, you know, it looks like a country loaf, but it's not dense and heavy and you know, a doorstop. It's still light and fluffy, but it's a little bit chewier. It has a little bit more flavor, a little bit more acidic notes, and more chewy bran. So that, you know, for me, that's what characterizes our bread is long fermentation, you know, fairly good acid note of that sourdough, and not super light and fluffy, but in the middle.
Great. So I want to ask you a little bit about, can I ask you a question? What's the light like? Is it changing? Do you think we have to worry about the color balance?
No, I have the balance and everything.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
So we're fine.
All right. Because sun's going
Yeah.
down, the color temperature changes.
Okay.
The color temperature is actually the same as the
Constant?
sun on the lights.
Yeah,
So,
okay,
yeah,
okay,
So we're fine.
all right. So I wanted to ask you about your perspective on activism, bread
Mhm.
activism. And you've said to me before that you kind of view yourself as an evangelist,
Mhm.
an activist in a sense. And I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about what that means for you.
Like as far as
As
whole
far as your
grain.
relationship to suppliers, your peers as bakers, and
Mhm.
the people you sell bread to.
Hmm.
You know, in what ways do you find yourself evangelizing?
Okay. I don't know if I know how to answer that. I mean, I think that we there's a duality in that I want to serve as healthy a bread as we can through using a high proportion of whole grain in there, but I'm not necessarily a fan of 100% whole grain breads. So because I feel they polarize, and I feel that yes, the macrobiotics and the true health evangelists will buy that bread, but the other 90% will look at it and go, "Oh man, that's like dense, and I don't like that." So, you know, my bread revolution is really about kind of going down the center, you know, kind of go down the middle, and trying to appeal to a few different groups of people at the same time.
And just following up on that, do you see your bakery playing any kind of a role in educating people? I mean, have you noticed that people take an interest in what's going on? In the
Yeah.
bread you make?
When I decided when I decided to go whole hog 100% heirloom grain, I think a lot of people thought I was crazy, and you know, I still think I'm a little bit crazy for doing it. But in light of the gluten-free reality that we exist in now, that is somewhat inexplicable. You know, nobody's really come out and said. There's not a definitive book that said, you know, people are gluten intolerant because of this or that. So, and nobody seems to be that concerned with what caused this. Why 1,000, 2,000, or 10,000 years later, suddenly in this small blip of time, humans are having a hard time. Humans predominantly in North America and Western Europe are having a hard time with wheat, you know. So all these question marks, knowing that it had something to do with pesticides, fungicides, knowing it had something to do with the wheat varieties and how they're grown and how they're selected, and not trusting our food system, made me want to jump headlong into buying wheat from farmers I know and varieties that I know sustained people for hundreds of years. I don't have as much science as I would like to have to back a clinical perspective of the evangelical cause of eat heirloom wheat because it will change your life, and you can absolutely digest it, and you won't have headaches and rashes and itchy blah blah blah, but I know enough about the things that go deeply wrong in our industrialized food system that I'm very happy to take a pretty drastic measure and use nothing but heirloom grains. And I don't know many bakeries in America that have done that, and I'm proud, and I'm very proud to have been one of the first to do it.
Okay, so last question. Well, there may be a final one, but we'll see. This one's about I don't know how to put this. It's about privilege, and so I can see so many people coming into your bakery and loving what you sell, and then there are other people who look at the food, the high quality of food available around here, and say, it takes a certain level of privilege to be able
Sure.
to have access to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you're concerned about that. You also have to worry about paying the bills.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to sell the bread at a certain price. But it's not just the price of the bread, it's also what people know. And so there's a certain amount of privilege involved in just knowing about
Sure.
what's good, healthy bread and what's not, and having the privilege to act on that. And I was, have you given thought to that? Do you have conversations about that with your peers about how to put this kind of bread into more people's hands? Into more people's stomachs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everything starts small, and it starts with the people that can affect change. And at certain points, you make decisions of who you partner with and who you bring on board to escalate the conversation and to widen the conversation and to make it to grow the mission. So about a year ago, I was approached by a huge mill, the biggest mill in the world, to help with some feedback about heirloom grain, and I thought to myself, geez, this is like, this is this huge organization that sells mostly white flour made from modern commercial wheat, not organic, not heirloom, certainly not biodynamic, and not typically grown by farmers that I know. And so I started a dialogue with this mill, and had some internal dialogue about, gosh, I don't know, these are the guys I want to partner with. I want to work with Jason at Aspen Moon. He's 10 blocks away, and I know his family, and so as I thought that through, I thought, geez, I should give every single bit of energy that I have to this large mill that is interested in heirloom grain, for whatever motives they may or may not have behind it, because those will be the folks who plant heirloom grain in vast acreage across many states in America and actually get it to end users at an affordable price. In Boulder County, it's a lot of us have no problem dropping $6, $7, $8 for a bag of arugula, or $6 for a bunch of carrots, or $6 or $8 for a loaf of bread. I'm happy. I work really hard. Thankfully, the business does well. I would love to support other food producers who are working in sustainable farms and growing organically and taking care of their staff adequately. We're in a very privileged circle here. So at a certain point, it needs to translate out to the less privileged. And I think that giving input and feedback and partnering on certain levels with the big boys, with the big mills. And, if Monsanto came here tomorrow and said, hey, we'd love to talk about some research and development within this new grain, or, gosh, do you have any recipe ideas? I would gladly support it. Do I support Monsanto and a lot of the work they do? Absolutely not. If they show a willingness to step towards the light, I'd do anything. So that's kind of my MO is it's free knowledge. It's growing a little bit of enlightenment about our food system and about where we need to get in order to continue to feed our planet and not poison our earth. How many years it takes to get there, I have no idea. But it's going very quickly, suddenly, here in Boulder County in Colorado.
So I have, I lied, I have one.
That's it, man. That's
final
it. Interview's over.
So we started with a biographical question, and I want to end it with one, because you were just nominated for a James Beard Award, which is fantastic, and I'm wondering if you have thoughts, or if you've been told why it was that you were nominated. What is it about your work, your bread, your bakery?
Yeah, I've asked myself that
nominated.
question quite a bit. When I look in the mirror, I don't think I see an award winning anything. I don't view myself as I'm not out trying to get awards. I'm honored when we get any accolade or anything that supports our cause. My team is so excited about it. I'm excited about it. Our business has flourished as a result of it. So it's an amazing thing. I'd like to think that we were nominated for this award because of our community involvement and because of our dedication to growing grains in this region that is prolific for growing grains, but organic heirloom grains. Part of me thinks it's not necessarily about a baguette or a recipe, and that it's really about the experience, because what we've created here is an experience. And I'm very passionate about bread, but I've realized in my 3 years of being at Moxie that I'm more passionate about community, and bread and pastry and coffee and music and art. It all is a part of that fabric. But whether we win the award or not, I move forward as a community baker, and that's what that's sort of what keeps me going every day.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This is great.
Thank you, London. Thank you. Thanks.
Did they work?
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, I'm just such a fidgeter for cash in the winter. So I think it's no, and that's like, I think we need both. But yeah, he's paying